So good afternoon. Let me welcome you all to the second lecture. It is from a series of lectures that are organized as a part of Visegrad project entitled Analytic Philosophy in Visegrad Countries. Before introducing the lecturer and this lecture itself, I would like to briefly mention what our Visegrad project is about. The main objective of the project is to promote analytic philosophy as developed and is still developing in the Visegrad region. To this end, we are organizing 3 workshops, one of which was devoted to logic in the Visegrad countries and already taken place in Ostrava, Czech Republic. The second is devoted to the philosophy of science in the Visegrad region. It will take place at the end of January in Banská Bystrica, Slovakia.
I think from Morocco, from Yemen. Many.
And
Who are the people Sahib was talking about last time? There are many.
please, could you turn your microphones off? Thank you. And the last workshop, the third one, is devoted to the philosophy of language in the Visegrad countries, and it will take place in September in Warsaw, in Poland next year. In addition, 10 audio podcasts will be recorded and published on the project websites, and we will hold a series of 9 online lectures, the second of which will take place today. So our today's lecturer is Professor Jaroslav Peregrin from the Institute of Philosophy of the Czech Academy of Sciences in Prague and from the University of Hradec Králové, Czech Republic. Me personally, I consider Jaroslav as to be the best known and, in my opinion, the most important representative of inferentialism from the Visegrad region. He's the author of dozens of books and papers on logic and the philosophy of language, but also of video blogs popularizing philosophy. His books written in English include Meaning and Structure from 2001, Inferentialism, Why Rules Matter from 2014, Philosophy of Logical Systems from 2019, Normative Species, How Naturalized Inferentialism Explains Us from the previous year, and his most recent book, as I discovered recently, is Meaning as a Set of Theoretic Object, published in June this year by College Publications in London. Today's lecture by Jaroslav is entitled Normative Species, and it is based on his aforementioned book. It's about rules and especially about the human ability to create, maintain, and follow rules as the root of what makes us humans different from other animals. It builds on the ideas of Sellar's and Brandom's inferentialism in a novel, naturalistic way. But the most important things, however, will tell you and us all Jaroslav himself, so I will now hand over to him. Please, Jaroslav, the screen is yours.
Thank you very much. Miloš, let me put up my slides. So, do you see the slides?
Yes.
Okay. So, this is my recent book on inferentialism. Miloš is true that there was another book more about formal semantics. In these books, I have rounded up some of my ideas, which I had since the publication of my previous book on inferentialism. And in this book, I tried to explain the rules and rule following more, as it were, from the anthropological viewpoint. I wanted to explain what does it take to introduce and maintain a social rule. How do we do it? How do we follow it? And so on. And I have put forward the thesis that rules are so important that we humans can be very well called normative species. So this is the title. And of course, an important aspect of this enterprise is whether we can explain rules, rule following and everything in a naturalistic manner. This is different from Brandom's inferentialism, which is not based on the assumption that we can naturalize norms. So this book was product of a project which we had in Hradec, Králové in the years 20 till 24, which was called inferentialism naturalized, norms, meanings, and reasons. You will probably no longer see the slide, or do you?
Yes, we can see them.
You can see them. Okay. So okay. So this is a table of content of the book. I'm not going to walk you through the book. I will say something about the ideas which I consider most important, but let me present what's in the book in general. So after an introduction, there are two chapters devoted to two philosophers whom I consider important predecessors to inferentialism, and that's Ludwig Wittgenstein and Wilfrid Sellar. So these are chapters 1 and 2. Then chapters 3 through 5 discuss various kinds of preliminaries, terminology, conceptual framework, and so on. Then in chapter 6, I turn my attention to normative attitudes, which are the key to my understanding of rules. According to me, we can reduce rules to normative attitudes. In chapter 7, I consider the possibility to discuss rules in purely natural manner. In chapter 8, I discuss the concept of correctness and rules and those aspects which do not seem to be so easily naturalized. So I try to argue that despite this, they can be naturalized. In chapter 9, I turn to systems of rules, sometimes also called institutions, because I think that maybe other animals other than humans have something which could be called rules. A lot of people argued that especially social animals do have something like rules. Maybe so, but I argue that what specifically human are systems of rules. Such systems as are the rules of chess. I'm pretty sure that no other animals don't have anything like that. So in the rest of the book, I deal with such systems of rules. First, I try to look at them from an evolutionary viewpoint as certain behavioral patterns. And I argue that the concept of practice, as normally used, is precisely something related to a system of rules. Probably the most important system of rules is the system of rules of our language games, which I call the space of meaningfulness. This chapter 12 is about language and about meaning, and chapter 13 is about logic. And then we have 3 short chapters which kind of tackle issues which were not properly discussed in the book. So the first chapter discusses the concepts of cooperation and morals. Chapter 15 addresses the concept of freedom, and chapter 16 addresses the concepts of objectivity and the world. So these last 3 chapters are kind of only rudimentary explanations of these concepts. In the chapter 17, I summarize what was said in the book earlier. Now, let me look, as I promised, at the ideas of the book which I find most important. So, first, the broad picture. What makes us humans special? What distinguishes us of other kinds of animals? There have been a lot of proposals during the history of philosophy and science. One thing which is often cited in this context is reason. Of course, humans as rational animals, that's something which is firmly connected to the history of philosophy. Aside of reason, we can also invoke language. And we have rules, especially the moral rules, but also other kinds of rules. And the traditional story goes as follows. And I admit that this is a kind of caricature. We humans grew bigger brains, which made us rational. Then it turned out to be useful to exchange our rational thoughts, and we developed language. And once we had language, it turned out to be useful to solidify our communal bonds with rules, moral and others, which we now could stipulate. So I don't think that anybody would be prepared to defend the traditional picture in so many words. But it seems to me that a lot of philosophers and scientists would present some better version of this story, leaving the order of language, reason, language, and rules as in the picture. In contrast to this, what I propose in the book is the following. I think that what comes first are rules, then language, and only then reasons. So again, very short and condensed exposition. We humans started to assume normative attitudes to each other. Their resonance yielded us rudimentary rules. We interlocked rules into normative arenas to which we have largely moved. In the arena of meaningfulness, we started to play our language games. And playing the game of giving and asking for reasons, we became rational. So this is my picture as contraposed to what I see as the classical picture. And in the rest of the lecture, I will present some details of this picture. First, I cannot help but present one of the quotes of Wilfrid Sellar, which are always very much entertaining. So Sellar says, when God created Adam, he whispered in his ear, in all contexts of action, you will recognize the rules. If only the rule to grow for rules to recognize. When you cease to recognize rules, you will walk on 4 feet. So you see that to call as humans normative creatures is not only my idea, that Sellar's is not very far from this. And I like the way he puts it. So, a rule following as a behavioral pattern. First important point I want to make is that mere irregularity is not yet a rule. That people of a community tend to relax on Sundays does not yet mean that there is such a rule. This is a kind of habit. And again, Sellar would tell us that we humans are creatures not of habits but of rules. The second point is that not all rules may be explicit. That there is a rule that one should relax on Sundays does not require that it is explicitly prescribed. Perhaps as remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. So it is not important. The rules can be kind of implicit. And they manifest itself in the form of the normative attitudes, which are considered so important for this kind of inferentialism. There is an important reason why not all rules can be explicit. The point is that when there is an explicit rule, it must be part of a symbolic system and as such must be interpreted. And it must be interpreted correctly. So it must be interpreted following the correct rules. That means that an explicit rules already presupposes some rules on which it rests. So not all rules can be explicit in pain of a vicious circle. So it follows that the rule is more than regularity and less than explicit rule. So the question now is, what more than mere regularity and less than explicit prescriptions must be present to let us conclude that the community in question follows rules? And my answer is normative attitude. So we must talk about normative attitudes now. So normative attitudes are certain pro and con attitudes, typically rewards and punishments, targeting kind of behavior independently of its protagonists. What I mean by this independently is that if I defend myself that somebody wanted to beat me, that's not a normative attitude. That's just a kind of self-defense. It's only when I protest, not only when somebody beats me, but when anybody beats anybody else, and I protest to this, then we have the normative attitude. And it's a normative attitude targeting beating, against beating. Now, when we have normative attitudes, then we can have an implicit rule. It is just consists of normative attitudes resonating across a society. So we can have a normative attitude targeting against beating, and when such normative attitudes are displayed by the great majority of the society, we can say that the society displays rudimentary implicit rule that one should not be beaten or something like that. Here is a quote from my book. Everywhere where we have a quote without a source, it's quote from the book. So what I write is the following. The rules come into being at the point when the pro and con attitudes come to be applied to kinds of behavior, irrespectively of whether the behavior in question directly concerns the individual who assumes the attitudes, and when these come to resonate across the community. It is one of the cornerstones of the complex behavioral syndrome that produces what we call human normativity. It is the step from a purely egocentric evaluation in terms of harmful for me versus helpful for me to the more abstract right or wrong, which applies to myself as well as to anybody else. So we have normative attitudes, and we have rudimentary rules as just a resonation of normative attitudes. So we do learn to observe rules in our childhood, and we continue to observe them during our whole life. This is, I think, quite clear. And recently, there have been a lot of papers by various scientists with experiments targeting the normativity of children and the beginnings of normativity in ontogeny. So I think this is something quite clear, that we learn to observe rules or follow rules when we are children, and we continue to follow rules during our whole life. Sorry. So again, a quote from the book. What experimental evidence has shown us is that humans have a specific sensitivity for rules. We can say, an uncanny knack for identifying rules. This concerns not only adult humans, but especially human toddlers. When an infant starts to explore the world, she inevitably encounters boundaries to the space which she can inhabit via finding out that some of her activities get regularly frustrated. They are, as it were, bounced off by the environment. We might perhaps conjecture that cognitively she starts to represent her world in terms of what is possible. But relatively soon, as her caregivers switch to more subtle ways of posing the normative boundaries, she recognizes the normative boundaries for what they are, something essentially different from natural ones. So I think it's quite clear that the education and enculturation of us humans consists to a great extent in learning to follow rules and to internalizing various kinds of rules as something which is as it were inevitable. And this is not only a matter of education and culturalization, but also something which we continue doing for the whole of our life. So let us return to the concept of behavior patterns, and let us look at these things from the viewpoint of, as it were, behavior. An organism may display behavioral pattern because this is hardwired in its brain by evolution. So what is a behavioral pattern? It's a kind of repeated manner of behavior, which is kind of displayed by all individuals of a species, like certain kind of birds fly to Africa for winter, or spiders catch flies into their webs, and humans, I don't know, play football. So behavioral pattern, and some of the behavioral patterns are quite clearly hardwired in the brain of the animals who display them. Like the birds and the spiders most probably do what they do because they have this hardwired in their brains. But the pattern may come into being because individuals are compelled into it by being rewarded when behaving in accordance with the pattern and penalized when not. This is by normative attitude. So a lot of patterns, especially we humans do, we don't do because we have them hardwired in our brains, but because they come to be as if softwired into our brains by our education and by the normative attitudes of our conspecifics. What I write in the book is the following. If we have a behavior pattern, like, for example, bowing to the chief, let us call the pattern that enforces this one, like forcing others to bow to the chief, an associated higher level pattern. So we have the behavioral pattern bowing to the chief, and associated higher level pattern as forcing others to bow to the chief. Now the trouble is that every pattern must be either transmitted genetically, or there must be the associated higher level pattern, which implements it, as it were. Thus, whichever pattern we take, there must be an infinite hierarchy of associated higher level patterns, the pattern associated with it, one associated with the one associated with it, etc. Or there must be a pattern somewhere at the hierarchy which would be innate. In the former case, we have an infinite regress. In the latter, we do not get rid of the innateness, only move it somewhere up the hierarchy. So the question is whether it's possible at all to have some behavioral patterns caused by normative attitudes. So this is the picture. This is an individual displaying a behavior pattern, like emitting a noise, for example. Here we can imagine this as an individual emitting a noise because this is the easiest way to picture a pattern. So why does the individual do it? Why does it display the pattern? Well, one possibility, the first possibility is that the pattern is kind of hardwired into the brain of the individual. But there is the second possibility, that the pattern is provoked by the normative attitudes of one's conspecifics. Now the question is, why would the conspecific display the behavior pattern of forcing individuals to display the first order behavior pattern? So we will be back to the picture shortly. So imagine a pattern that can be enforced in one sweep with its associated higher level pattern. The enforcers would be able to not only make the enforcees bow to the chief, but also make them force others to bow to the chief. So again, a quote from the book: call a normative attitude supernormative if it has the property that it enforces not only its target pattern, but also the associated higher level pattern. What we have just indicated is that once a species was able to wield such supernormative attitudes, it would be ready for a purely non-genetic spreading of behavioral patterns. What I want to claim here is that we humans are such species. We have developed a peculiar ability of grasping normative attitudes, targeting us as not only something to which we should yield, but rather as something that ought to be, something that should also be required of ours. So again, the picture. So my conspecific forced me to display the behavioral pattern, like bowing to the chief or emitting a certain sound. But not only that, in one sweep, it makes me force the behavioral pattern of my conspecifics. So I think the point of rules is precisely in that they can achieve this. So let me dwell with it for a little while. So the specific normative attitude which we express linguistically by saying that something ought to be thus and so, or should be thus and so, does not only mean that one should do what ought to be or what should be, but one should also require from others to do this. So this is as far as I can see the point of rules, and this is how rules can work in the context of evolution. Now let's turn our attention to the integrative rules, to the systems of rules. So integrative in contrast to self-standing rules, they do not work alone, but rather in interdependence with many other rules. So such rules are: the bishop moves only diagonally. This rule makes no sense in isolation. It makes sense as part of the system of rules of chess. Or you should receive communion under one kind, but not under both. This is also not meaningful in isolation, but as a part of systems of religious doctrines, it may make such a sense that people kill each other for this. So again, a quote: while self-standing rules can often be imagined as being unproblematically carried along by normative attitudes, the more tightly they become integrated into a system, the more complicated it is to sustain them. To sustain, that is, the whole system, without the help of language. Some of the systems then simply cannot exist otherwise than in terms of an explicit and complex linguistic infrastructure. So we have the integrative rules, parts of the systems of rules, and such systems bring in some kind of new quality in comparison to the self-standing rules. They are something which really makes us different from animals of our species, it seems to me. So what is important for me and crucial for the story I want to tell is that integrative rules, as if open up an inside space, I sometimes call it an arena, which we can enter. That the systems might resemble virtual edifices is based precisely on the ability of its component rules to act as walls, in that they restrict our behavior to block, as it were, our movements in certain directions. And if such walls are combined in an appropriate way, what we get may be a dwelling. And inside the dwelling, we may become able to do things which cannot be done outside of it. So this is a metaphor, but this is a crucial metaphor for my story. It seems to me that we live most of our lives within such normative arenas, and this completely changes our way of life and makes us humans the normative creatures we are. Well, imagine chess. When you enter the arena of chess, that means when you accept the rules of chess as applying to you because you want to play a game of chess. If you do it, then you are out of a sudden able to do things which you could not do outside of the arena, like check an opponent's king, for example. This makes no sense outside of the arena. The same is with football. But sports serve us only as an illustration. The really important things come with our kinds of arenas. So, a quote again: we use rules to mark out the spaces in which our societies function and in which we consequently live our lives. And it is the restrictions that are suitable to mark out playgrounds on which we can play new kinds of games. And of course, they are often not games in the literal sense of the word, but rather much more substantial social activities. In this way, they can and do alter our human forms of life. Thus, far from only restricting us, they are constitutive of the arenas in which our social and consequently also personal lives are taking place. So let me return to the previous metaphor. If I set up a rule, it usually prohibits me from doing certain things. So why to do this? It's like, why to build a wall? When we have a meadow and in the middle of the meadow we build a wall, it doesn't seem to make much sense. It only prevents us from going a certain way across the meadow. But when we add 3 other walls and a roof, we could have a house, and the house is an extremely useful thing. The same with rules. When we say bishop moves only diagonally, it prevents us from moving it any other way. Why do it? Why restrict our possibilities in this way? Well, because when we add our kinds of rules, we get the enjoyable game of chess, which is so popular across the whole mankind. Okay. Now the concept of practices. Imagine a behavioral pattern by some animals. A flock of hens, for example, rushing out of a hen house looking for food. From our viewpoint, though presumably not from the hens, there is a meta level to this behavior. On the meta level, we, though not they, can describe their behavior. We can take it for correct, measured by our aims, or incorrect, and we can attempt to regulate it. We can open the doors of the hen house at certain hours, prepare food for the hens at certain places, etc. The existence of the meta level is given by the fact that we humans can assume certain attitudes towards the behavior of the hens. We can report it or try to influence it. Sorry. Continuation of the quote. However, it can happen that those who display the attitudes on the meta level and those who display first level behavior targeting the ground level one are the same humans as those who display the ground level behavior. In this case, the whole pattern consisting of the two levels becomes what we can call self-reflective. We may call such activities practices. And the thesis which I defend here is that human activities are mostly characterized by being practices in this sense of the word. So what we humans do have often the character of practices which not only do things, but evaluate these things as correct or incorrect. And we correct one another in the way we already talked about, so display our normative attitudes. So practices are doings interanimated with normative attitudes. So now at least a few words about the space of meaningfulness. So space of meaningfulness is, as I see it, one of the arenas constituted by rules. Especially it's the arena built of the rules of our language games, where we can produce meaningful utterances. So, quote again, at the outset, inferences were just habitual emittings of sounds in reaction to other sounds. What then happens is that the habitual links between kinds of sounds are turned normative by means of the emergence of normative attitudes. And with the growing complexity of such normative entangledness of the various sounds, potentially imbued with empirical content because some of the rules that govern them incorporate the word, the roles of the kinds of sounds become what we now call meanings. And we can say that just as in the space of chess, pieces of wood become chess pieces that can form an army with the potential to fight an opponent's army, so in the space of language, certain kinds of sounds become specific kinds of reports, orders, or questions, and so on, with the potential carrying out a fruitful linguistic intercourse. They become vehicles for playing our language games, which transform us into the kind of discursive creatures that we are. So, this is a last slide, but before I finish the lecture, let me return to the idea of the normative arenas. So the most basic idea is that the normative arena provides me with a space in which I can do a lot of things I cannot do outside. Now imagine which things which we normally do in our lives is normative in the sense that they are enabled by normative arenas. So for example, I can marry, I can study in university, I can play chess and football, I can do all kinds of other things, but most of the things we humans do take place within various normative arenas and are possible only thanks to the normative arenas. This, as far as I can see, distinguishes us humans from other kinds of animals and make it appropriate for us to bear the label of normative species. So That's it, I think. And if you have any questions,
Thank you very much.
I try to answer them.
Thanks a lot for your lecture. Now follows a section for questions and answers. So if you have any questions or objections or comments on the lecture, please click on the hand icon. You can find it in the reactions panel down in the Zoom to request to speak. So Jaakko Rainkinen, I'm sorry, Rainkainen, Jaakko in short, please.
Yes, thank you. So I was thinking about can you hear me well, by the way?
Yes, I can.
Okay. So I was thinking about the big picture at the beginning. So you had the classical picture and then your alternative picture. And in your alternative picture, we started with rules, and then we moved to language and then to rationality.
Yes.
But I have some trouble understanding how is it that the rules can come before language if we look at how children actually acquire language, because and this is just something Chomsky has, of course, emphasized, but also others, because it seems that language is not really taught in the sense that rules are taught. Children are not, I mean, very small children, like less than 3 years old. They are not really taught language. They are rather exposed to language. Yes. And they can learn words on very slim basis, as we know. There's the poverty of stimulus arguments. I'm sure many know about this. So children are not really taught language. They are just exposed to language, and then they learn to speak. And it seems that they can learn to speak long before they can come to understand even simple rules like brush your teeth or don't mess around at the table or something like this. So I was wondering, in what sense can the rules then come before language, if language is? So seems to be such, yeah. Well, you understand.
Yeah. So one thing is, I do think that we learn the rules of language from the very beginning. As I remember, I don't remember very well, but if I remember when I was very young, my parents kept telling to me, look, this is a doggy. Is it a doggy? A doggy? No, this is not a doggy. This is a cat, or something like that. So it seems to me that my parents kept correcting me in the sense that they tried to learn me what is correct to say and what not. And of course, you are right that they were not explaining rules. They were just trying to learn me the skill of language, skill of linguistic communication, not as theory. So it seems to me that from the very beginning, we are introduced in the space of meaningfulness, in that we learn various rules which constitute it. And so we slowly come to do the things in the arena which count for meaningful actions. In the linguistic case, actions like reporting that it's raining outside and asking somebody to close the door and so on and so on and so on. So what do you think is the problem?
Well, let's take the dog example. So a child can learn the meaning of dog just by giving a couple examples. Yeah, let's say. Of course, there's a lot of subtleties here going on, but is it then a rule with what the child learns? Can we say that the child learns the rule, a rudimentary rule, of how to use the word dog. And in what sense can we say this? Because, you know, well, as you said yourself, it's not that the word dog is presented as a form of a rule. So there's no it's simply used by the parents, but the parents don't say we use the word dog for yeah, they just use the word dog and the child learns it. So of course what you say then is that the rule is implicit. We learn the rule implicit, the rule is somehow implicitly present. But I don't know, it just seems kind of difficult to get how the implicit rule is sufficient. How could it be sufficient to explain the child's ability to use the word dog that is acquired on such a slim basis? And of course, Chomsky, you mentioned Chomsky, I think at least once in the Normative Species book, but I don't think you really go into Chomsky's arguments. You mentioned, for example, that Chomsky uses rule as sort of a, not in the sense you do it, but
Yeah.
isn't Chomsky's point precisely that, yes, we don't need rules in your sense to explain language. Rather, we just need, Chomsky, he also talks about principles. So the principles that govern the language faculty's operations, and of course, and of which we don't know very much about. But these principles, they are descriptive. They are just they just explain how the language faculty operates. But that's all we really need. We don't need anything normative in your sense to explain language acquisition. This is Chomsky's.
Well, Chomsky will certainly disagree with me, and I disagree with him because he has no space for rules in my sense of the word, because what he calls rules is something different. And also I can help you to one counter argument. Steven Pinker, in the book about Chomsky linguistic, the language instincts, he talks about kinds of tribes which do not learn children language at all. Just like let them be exposed to the language. And Pinker says they learn the language just by being exposed to it, not being taught. I don't know whether this is true, but it seems to me that even if you were to observe the game of chess for a time long enough, you might learn the rules. So if you argue with Chomsky, of course, we would not easily find a common ground.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks. We will move to next question from Sara Papic. Please, Sara.
Hi, thank you. So I probably should have read the book before tuning in, but I guess I have to ask the big question, which is for me, how the naturalization works. So if I understood correctly, you understand rules as being primary in the system, and these rules are based on normative attitudes. So I am assuming that these normative attitudes can be cashed out naturalistically, you think? So how is that supposed to work?
So could you repeat the last sentence before how this is supposed to work?
Yeah, so how are these normative attitudes going to be, I guess, naturalistically respectable?
Okay. So it seems to me to be clear that in the prehistory of mankind, many individuals of our species tried to force our individuals to do something, to give me their meals or something like that, or to help me with something and so on. All kinds of animals do this, it seems to me. But we humans are, it seems to be characteristic in that we pushed this kind of forcing onto a new level where we first have the attitudes resonate across the community. So why this happens, I'm not sure, probably because it's useful from the viewpoint of evolution, but it happens that the normative attitudes start to resonate across the society. So different individuals display the same kind of normative attitude. That's one thing. And second thing is that the attitudes become, as Mikhail Tomasello calls them, agent neutral. That means they target only the kind of relationship or doings or something like that, and not the specific individuals which are in the relationships or are doing what they are doing. So these two, it seems to me that there are these two things that must appear in order for there be rudimentary rules.
Oh, okay. Maybe I can rephrase. So my question is basically, do you think that normative attitudes can be fully described without using any normative language?
Not all of them, I would say. Certainly, there are normative attitudes which aim at achieving some kind of normative state or something like that. That's certainly possible, but it seems to me that the most rudimentary attitudes can be described without the normative language because they amount just to preventing somebody from doing something or holding him into doing something.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. The first question appeared in chat. It's from Mirko Sambrota. So if it's possible, Mirko, you can ask the question by yourself, please. No, it
So
seems.
that's probably a reason why he wants to ask them where
So if you can see the question, Jaroslav,
I do see it. Yes.
You can try to answer.
So the basic question is: do the members of a bee colony in a hive follow rules, or they merely exhibit regular patterns of behavior? So they merely exhibit regular patterns of behavior because they don't display, as far as I can know, and I was a beekeeper for some time. So it seems to me that they do not display anything like the normative attitudes. Now let me read on. Couldn't their behavior be fully explained in terms of mechanisms of reward and punishment as forms of evaluation? I don't think that bees evaluate each other and reward and punish each other. And how would this differ from interpreting the behavior of a human community whose practices are completely alien to ours? If their practices are completely alien to ours, then we might have troubles in understanding what we are doing. But it seems to me that, as a matter of fact, we always kind of manage to understand an unknown community. So we could assume that we kind of know how to do it, even in complicated cases. And how would we say that such a community follows rules, or only that it displays behavior irregularities? In other words, from a fully external point of view, is there really a meaningful difference between describing the behavior in a hive or in a radically alien human community as normatively rule-governed rather than mere behavioral regularity? I think this is a good question, and I think I can answer it. It all comes down to the normative attitude. The thing is that I assume that we can identify normative attitudes. There is a nice quote from Wittgenstein where he says, well, we do recognize what is it to correct somebody's slip of the tongue or something like that. So we can recognize the game or sub-game of correcting somebody. So it seems to me that we can recognize, even in the doings of alien culture, what are the normative attitudes. So what is rewarding, punishing, what is preventing somebody from doing something, what is forcing somebody to do something. And if this is the case, then we can very well say that bees do not follow rules because they don't display normative attitudes. And I think that if we are confronted with the alien culture, we can recognize whether there are any normative attitudes in what they do. And if so, then we can go on to find out whether they follow rules or not. So
Okay.
that would be it.
Thanks. So the next question is from Anthony Ustritsky. Please, Anthony.
Yes. So first of all, thank you for your lecture. And my question is this. I haven't read your book, but I've read your paper from 3 years ago, I think, about naturalizing inferentialism. And you've said there that your project of naturalization is in opposition to teleosemantics. And we essentially have this naturalized teleosemantics, and you do something different with naturalized inferentialism. But I'm not quite sure that what you do is really incompatible with teleosemantics. And I think that we can accept your thesis that normative attitudes are very important, but have even more naturalized semantics by saying that they fulfill certain biological functions. So more technically, for example, Routh-Millikan's proper functions. So really my question is, why shouldn't we accept teleo-inferentialism, so to speak, on your account?
Okay. What you say seems to me to be quite plausible. Of course, we can. There are ways of naturalizing meaning, but maybe if it would help if you could specify explicitly what you imagine as a naturalization of meaning of semantics.
Okay, so I think that you wrote that paper in Philosophical Topics, and it was a whole edition about naturalizing inferentialism, and Ulf Hlobil proposed this teleo-inferentialism. And essentially it would be the thesis that like classical teleosemantics gives like biological meta-semantics, and representationist regular semantics. And teleo-inferentialism would keep this biological meta-semantic component, but would treat semantics as determined by inferential roles. So it would be like Brandom plus Millikan.
I'm not sure I understand this whole, even about teleosemantics as presented by Wolf. It's not quite clear to me, because there is, of course, the idea of Ruth Millikan, of making semantics kind of natural in the sense of evolution. But I think I have a specific view of meaning. I think that meaning is the inferential role. So you must, as far as I can see, you must naturalize inference. And when you naturalize inference, you are through. You have meaning naturalized, because meaning, as I take it, is an inferential role. Hence, if you naturalize inference, you naturalize inference roles, and you naturalize meanings. So I don't think I need any other kind of naturalization of semantics.
Okay, but nevertheless, I think that within telesemantics, they do a lot of interesting stuff. So if you could somehow combine these two ideas, it would be probably even more interesting. But I understand that your system is quite complete, nevertheless.
Yeah, of course. Therefore, I say that what you say seems to be plausible, because I don't see why my account should be incompatible with the other ones. But of course, there might be some differences in who thinks meaning is. I think that meaning is secondary to inferences. Other people certainly don't think this. So this might be a source of some discrepancies.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. I think that we could come back to the chat line, because there is follow-up by Mirko Sambrota. He has next question, if you can see it, Jaroslav. It's in the chat line.
In the chat.
Yeah. The question is, I can read it. Many thanks. But for instance, being expelled from the hive could be conceived as a form of punishment, couldn't it?
Well, I see. Being expelled from the hive.
Yeah.
For instance, being expelled from the hive could be conceived as a form of punishment, couldn't it? I'm not sure how, whether there is such a kind of behavior that could be reasonably described as expelling from the hive. I'm not quite sure I know this is a kind of a popular lore, but I'm not sure what exactly happens in such a situation. So I don't think it's expelling as a form of punishment or something like that.
Okay, thanks. Next question is from Tadeusz Ciecierski. Tadeusz, please.
Yes. So first of all, thank you for the lecture. It was super interesting. So I have a very general question, which is probably a bit related to the Sarah's question, a little bit. So it seems to me that it's quite clear that the notion of this normative attitude is central to your approach, right? And and what I would like to ask you about is a kind of a worry which I have, but probably I might be mistaken to have it in mind. So your notion of normative attitude, as I understand it, involves some level of generality in two aspects at least. The one is that we abstract from particular protagonists, right? The
Yes.
other that we are involved not in individual actions, but in kinds of actions, right? So that's also important. So my worry is like this: if this is the case, if this generality is involved in the notion of normative attitudes, then one might wonder how this is possible to have normative attitudes in this sense, involving generality, without previously having language or some system of rules like this. So this is a general worry which I have. And could you please perhaps say a few words more about it?
So it seems to me that it's not quite difficult to assume normative attitudes without the help of language or something like that. For example, there is the situation I talked about. Somebody beats somebody else, and I try to prevent him from doing this, and I do the same thing when anybody beats anybody else. So that would be by my right a normative attitude, perhaps. And now it seems to me that it's just that it might be just the feeling of disliking violence which helps me to this attitude, without any kind of thinking of abstraction from situation, from the protagonists, and so on and so on. It seems to me that these ground level normative attitude might be anchored directly from just emotions or something like that.
Okay. So it seems that that the question was answered because Tadeusz is quiet. Thank you, Tadeusz. The next
Thank
question.
you.
The next question is from Jako again. So please.
Okay, so I know we of course know you are an inferentialist, but if we approach the question from a referentialist point of view, then I think it can be questioned whether language really does require the presence of normative attitudes in your sense. So take the example of naming, giving proper names to people, for example. Well, you mentioned in the book, and this is around page 104, that it's not enough simply to behave in certain regular ways according to some descriptive principle in order to get language. So it's not enough to use a certain name of a certain person, for example, just regularly call them by that name. But you also need to have the normative attitude, which is to say that the people who use the name must also take a certain pro-attitude, some kind of normative attitude. But is this really necessary? Because even you think about when a baby is named, what happens is, well, of course there are cultural differences, but very roughly, the parents first simply start using the name of the child, and other people pick up the name, and probably they can have attitudes that this is the name that should be used. But also, when I reflect on my own name usage, I don't often have these sort of attitudes when I use a name. I just use the name. And on the other hand, we could think of a contrasting scenario, a nickname, where someone is given a nickname. And let's say the person who gets the nickname doesn't like it at all. So they try to prohibit others from using it. And let's say it's a somewhat offensive nickname. So other people don't want to use the name. They have a negative normative attitudes towards using the name. But still, in some sense, it seems that it is, if the nickname, gets used sometimes, or maybe just a couple times in the right circumstances, then it is the name of the person. Nicknames can be just as good names as any other names in some circumstances. But the issue is, it might happen even if people have negative normative attitudes towards using the name as a name. Can't names still work as names? And that, of course, if that's true, then you have an example of language being used that does not require normative attitudes.
So there is an individual such that our people, when they see him, tend to emit something like Bill or Jack or Tom. And other kind of people are afraid of this guy. So when they see him, they emit something like, "Oh, yeah, terrible," something like that. What makes the first kind of sound name of the person and the second kind not? It seems to me that it's not possible to answer this question without talking of some kind of rules or correctnesses and incorrectnesses. It seems to me that something is the name only if something is incorrect. You cannot use the sound for everything you encounter. For example, you cannot call everything Bill if it's somebody's name. Or that's maybe a bad example, but what makes the first kind of sound into name of the person and second kind of sound no?
Well, if you have some kind of a Kripkean causal historical picture, then there's two kinds of uses for proper names. First kind of use is the most important. That's the what Michael David calls the grounding uses. So the grounding uses are uses of the name with some kind of ostensive contact with the bearer of the name. And this is just something that regularly happens, that people use the name regularly of that person in an ostensive setting. But then second kind of use is just borrowing use. So people who haven't encountered the bearer of the name just use the name because they have borrowed it from some other people. And well, what makes this a use of name as opposed to just random noise? Well, to me, it seems that all you need is to say that they regularly use it as a name of that person. And they don't use it as a name of some other person or of some other object. They just use it as a name of that person. But do they have to think that it's correct to use it as a name? Or it doesn't seem to add much to say that they need to, on top of using the name regularly as a name of the specific person only, it would add something to say that they have to regard this as the correct way to behave. They just do it.
Yeah. You talked about a ground usage of a name. So the question for me is, what makes an usage of a sound, baptism or introduction of a name? What makes something into this, and not just a reaction to a person?
Well, that's a complicated question, of course, and I'm not saying it's a solved problem for the preferentialist. I mean, it
seems to me that you need to talk about baptism. You already need some kind of institution like the church or something like that.
Well, do you though? I mean, why would you need that?
Because you cannot, it seems to me you cannot explain otherwise what is a baptism. It's a kind of it's a thing you can do, as I would put it, only in the arena constituted by a religious doctrine, for example, or not literally religious, some kind of civil institution. But it's always an institution because the name that then plays some kind of important role.
Yes, but I don't see why the role should have to be specified as specifically normative role, as opposed to just something that people do. Yes, why wouldn't the purely descriptive?
How would you explain to me what is giving a name to something or somebody? As far as I can see, this is a very, very complicated thing which cannot be done without the help of an institution.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's the sort of Wittgensteinian idea, I take.
Yes.
You know,
Yes,
Wittgenstein at many
Yes.
places says that. Well, when he criticizes ostension. But I don't know. There's of course a long debate about this, about Wittgenstein's criticism. But well, well, it won't be settled here. But I just say, well, if Kripke's ideas and Michael David's ideas are remotely right, then all you really need is the causal connection together with some appropriate intentions. And the intentions don't need to be descriptive. You just need intentions, and you need some kind of, well, Kripke thinks that you need de re knowledge of the object that you are naming. You need to have some kind of de re knowledge. David is less strict. He says only that you need an intention and a causal connection. You don't need to have de re knowledge of the object. But still, neither of them, I don't think, thinks that there needs to be an institution in Wittgenstein's sense. And frankly, I'm not sure why Wittgenstein thinks that. But of course, that's a longer debate. So, so yeah, that's just what I wanted to say. But maybe we can move on from that. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you too. So I don't see other hands, but the last, no, there is none. Okay, so it seems that we should finish. Jaroslav, thank you very much once again. Thank you for discussion. Thank all of you for participating, and I hope that you will have nice evening. So, bye.
So, thank you for inviting me.